Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Aether Hub. I'm Simon, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Wizards of the Coast has done something different for the story of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and the entire story has been released in very quick succession. So I've taken the time to compile the entire story right here in one place for your enjoyment. Remember to hit that like button. The Phyrexians don't want you to see this one, so make sure you subscribe and share it so their plot on Kamigawa doesn't go unnoticed. I thank you all so much in advance for helping support the Aether Hub, and now, the complete story of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. The story of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty starts with a young boy and his sister being dropped off at the steps of the palace in Ganjo, the seat of the Emperor of Kamigawa. This boy, Kaito, and his sister, Eiko, are orphans from the Plains Undercity, seeking a new life serving the Emperor as well as the whole of Kamigawa. They are taken in by an advisor to the Emperor herself, a Kitsune teacher named Lightpaws. Through her many years of service, Lightpaws senses potential in these two youngsters and welcomes them to Nganjo. Life in the palace was not easy for the siblings. Every day they trained in hand-to-hand combat with Lightpaws, learning the basics required to defend the Emperor from harm should their service be needed. Kaito and Eiko sparred with one another time and time again, watching as they became more skilled with each passing lesson. But a time would come when they were no longer children, where they would need to choose a path, a purpose that would serve Kamigawa and their emperor. Kaito would be pressured down the path of a samurai, the elite warriors who protect the emperor directly, while his sister Eiko would go on to be a kami diplomat, someone who converses and negotiates with the ancient spirits, known as kami, who bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual realms. However, Kaito never felt it was his destiny to become a samurai, and he bucked at this responsibility, until a chance encounter with a mysterious girl behind a paper screen. While skulking about the rooftops of Nganjo, Kaito runs across the silhouette of this young girl about his own age. It was the Emperor. Rather than shooing the rogue away from her window, the two talked and enjoyed each other's company. They quickly became friends, and their nightly chats became a regular thing. It wasn't until Kaito's first day of training as a samurai did he actually get to meet his new friend in person. As his new sparring partner stepped forward, it was clear from her voice that he would be training alongside the Emperor. Their friendship only grew from there. During the day, they would spar, and at night, Kaito would sneak out and they would enjoy a more candid conversation without the eyes of formalities or advisors. They had a pure bond between them, but as they got older, it was clear that their paths too were diverging. The Emperor, whose growing duties required her to serve the whole of Kamigawa, and Kaito's training, eventually leading to him serving the Emperor. Behind the scenes, political intrigues are taking place on Kamigawa. A group known as the Uprisers are growing in significance, renegades who want to tear down the imperial system of Nganjo and end the empire. At the same time, the Futurists, scientists looking to push the bounds of technology on Kamigawa, say their extreme research is for the good of its people. However, their tech is heavily regulated by the Imperials, thus causing friction. It is in this climate that Kaito finally finds out what he stands for. During an encounter with a Soratami, or moonfolk, named Ketsumasa, he learned what the Futurists were all about. How they wanted to spread tech to the neediest of Kamigawa, the sick and the poor. People like his parents, who died because they couldn't get their hands on the needed tech to cure their disease. And when they scrapped some medicine from the black market, they were arrested by the Imperials, dying in prison. With that, Kaito became a futurist, and endangered his relationship with the Emperor. Though the two no longer sparred with one another, that didn't stop Kaito from rushing to his friend's aid when the palace alarm sounded an intruder. He was the first to make it to the Emperor's quarters, finding it empty. Deep within the sacred temple halls of Kyodai, the guardian kami of all of Kamigawa, Kaito would first spy the man he believed was responsible for his friend, the Emperor's disappearance. A man with a metal arm. Though the stranger would escape that night, it would kickstart Kaito's journey to find the Emperor and restore her place on the throne, so he could again take his friend's side. Fast forward a number of years later, Kaito has left palace service seeking answers. joining a gang known as the Hyozan Reckoners, who may have access to information regarding the Emperor's whereabouts. He receives a new mission from their leader, Yumezawa, to find a Soratami conducting illegal experiments on Kami and bring that tech back to the Reckoners. He travels to the Jukai Forest, one of the most spiritual places on Kamigawa, teeming with powerful Kami. So, he calls in a favor from his sister, who is now an aspiring Kami diplomat. It's a good thing he called Aiko in too, because if he hadn't, Akemi probably would have crushed him the moment he stepped into the forest. Together they find the target of the Reckoners, a slender moonfolk named Tamishi. Confronting the scientist, they demanded to know what he hoped to learn by studying the Kami and fusing them with his technology. Tamishi's intentions were pure. He didn't study on any unwilling Kami, and Kamigawa had changed so much with technology that, one day, the Kami too would need to adapt, or be threatened by humans' continuous advancements. Tamishi simply wanted to help the Kami and Kamigawa. With that said, he came to the forest seeking one Kami in particular, a spirit in the shape of a tanuki he saw flash from Kyodai's temple. By happenstance, the very same night the Emperor disappeared. Kaito believed this Kami, born in the physical realm, could somehow be connected to the missing Emperor. This connection was confirmed when the tanuki spirit in question called out in a tone similar to the voice of Kyodai, a song only Kaito could hear. Using the tech Tamishi had designed that could contain the spiritual energy of a Kami without restraining it, essentially a robotic drone, the Tanuki Kami leapt into the suit and made its allegiance to Kaito apparent. This was no ordinary Kami, being born of the physical realm, with the ability to communicate and command other Kami, even those more powerful than itself. It was the first of its kind. It possessed strange powers that it bestowed to Kaito. A feeling of pulling and stretching, of sinking and falling. The Tanuki Kami, now known as the Kami of the Spark, Himoto, made Kaito a planeswalker. With their fates tied, Kaito and the Kami of the Spark felt a pull to explore the multiverse, that somehow the Emperor was no longer on Kamigawa but out there, somewhere beyond the blind eternities. Together they traveled and learned, but always finding time to return to their home and check in on Aiko and Tamishi. It was during one of these reunions that Aiko provided Kaito with some troubling intelligence. In the 10 years since the Emperor's disappearance, and their friendship with Tamishi began, Kamigawa had tilted further and further to disorder. The empty throne was ripe for the taking, the futurists grew bold, the council of advisors bickered amongst themselves, and the uprisers were growing in strength and fervor. But that wasn't all. As it turned out, their greatest enemy could be someone very close to them. Aiko revealed that Tamishi had been involved in some very shady dealings, and even has had contact with the man with the metal arm, the target Kaito has been searching for this past decade. The one who took the Emperor. Kaito rushed to Otawara, the floating city of the Moonfolk and the location of Tamishi's research lab. Using his skills as a ninja and rogue, Kaito tracked his friend and found he was up to some very secretive business, experimentations that even the other futurists didn't know about. But still, no concrete evidence, he knew the man with the metal arm. He intercepted a vague message from one of Tamishi's drones, a meeting in the Undercity. It was a chance to catch his betrayal in the act, and perhaps the man with the metal arm as well. Before leaving, Kaito took some blueprints showing a small device, like a chip, with elegant tendrils of blue light dancing from its base. It was the only thing connecting Tamishi, this meeting, and his illicit research. Now, spying on the meeting Tamishi was attending in the Undercity, the situation seemed much more dire than Kaito first realized. The laboratory was littered with beacons of neon-filled liquids, stuff he had never seen from any futurist lab before. Behind locked cages, he saw Kami, strapped to metal tables, tubes and wires connected to monstrous machines, their spiritual energy being drained. Kaito may be no Imperial, but he didn't want the Kami treated like this.
The fleshling's previous utility is irrelevant. Doubt and weakness must be excised from the whole. Finalize collecting the necessary materials and transfer the required specimens. Do not slow progress. The subject's regaining a full conscious state is an inevitable outcome. All evidence must be eradicated. Expansion of the work will continue in a more optimal location, courtesy of the Fleshling.
It was a monster. It's the only way Kaito could describe it. With that command, the beast ordered his henchmen, hired Hyozin goons by the looks of it, to set blaze to the stores of glowing beakers. Quickly, the place took to flame, and Kaito struggled to gather anything of value, any clue that could lead him to the missing emperor. Among the cataclysm, he spots a body barely moving. It was Tamishi, mortally wounded, slashed through the chest by that hulking metallic monster. As his friend laid there dying, nothing mattered. Not regrets, not betrayal. Kaito needed to know. Who was he working with? Who was the man with the metal arm? With a final breath, Tamishi whispered the name Tezzeret. With that name, Kaito lost a friend, but he gained a new lead. Kaito searched the ancient archives and living historians of Kamigawa for any reference to the name Tezzeret. Only one thing popped up. An incident in a Nezumi village some years ago recorded that Tezzeret appeared to the ratfolk with a broken mind, a victim of his former colleagues and organization, who subsequently burned down their village, killing countless and left Tezzeret there for dead. The Nezumi took the man in and healed him best they could, but it was clear Tezzeret's mind was lost, until one day, a dragon came to them and negotiated for Tezzeret's body. The village so feared retribution from Tezzeret's organization that they scattered, vanished, and became ghosts, save for one youngster whose name became public, Nashi. Kaito went to the poisonous marshlands of the Nezumi, and among their fungal farms, found no love from the ratfolk. They despised humans in their sense of civility. They looked down on the Nezumi as nothing more than beasts. So they tried to civilize themselves, to no avail. Kaito found no allies here. He feigned giving up his search, but uttering Nashi's name alone put the young Nezumi in danger, which caused the village to react, exactly as Kaito had counted on. Using his Tanuki drone housing the Kami Himoto, he spied on the ratfolk's conversation and intercepted a crude messenger tech, revealing someone was protecting this Nashi in Odawara. The floating city was his next target. Walking the streets of Odawara, following the Nezumi drone, Kaito is surprised that he's the one now being tracked. Spinning quickly, blade in hand, ready to defend himself, a tall female moonfolk with pale light skin magically floating scrolls around her stood before him. She knew more than Kaito had hoped, respectfully asking Kaito to give up his search, which clearly he wasn't prepared to do. He wasn't sure what these scrolls were, but if they were spells, he would need to act quick before she could cast them. The fight was quick and graceful, as Kaito used his favorite tactic, breaking down his segmented katana into sharp throwing stars, and mentally projecting them with deadly speed. Though this moonfolk seemed just as nimble, able to dance through the attack effortlessly. Kaito changed his strategy, attacking her scrolls instead, hoping to shred them. Then, failing that, he cut the rope that secured her satchel of spells to her body. As they fell, the moonfolk stumbled to collect them, leaving her open. Kaito leapt and took one of her scrolls, thinking it was her prepared spell, but the moonfolk simply grabbed another and cast it, freezing and locking Kaito's muscles in place. He had become paralyzed. The stranger wanted to cast a mind spell on the boy to wipe his memory of this, protect her family from his intrusion. Though his lips were locked, Kaito uttered the name Tezzeret. With a shocked look on her face, she releases him from the spell and introduced herself as Tamiyo. Together the two ventured to Tamiyo's compound where they met with her son, Nashi. Yes, this adopted ratfolk is Tamiyo's family now. Here, Tamiyo revealed that she too was a planeswalker, and that she understood Kaito to be one as well. She had collected paintings on different worlds that Kaito recognized as not of Kamigawa, and only a fellow planeswalker could possibly do that. Their conversation then turns to Tezzeret. The young Nashi himself doesn't have information to share really, but Tamiyo is quite familiar with this enemy planeswalker. Kaito learned that this man was in fact the man with the metal arm, matching his description perfectly on the night that the Emperor went missing. But he also learned just how dangerous Tezzeret was. Everything began to click into place. Tezzeret was interested in ancient Kamigawan artifacts. He studied the magical essence of the Kami. It's why he was in Kyodai's temple. He was researching Kyodai that night. It's also why the Kami of the Spark came to him. His purpose was always somewhere outside of Kamigawa, resting with these planeswalkers. While researching on Kamigawa was enough to spring Tamiyo from her usual decree of neutrality, it wasn't enough to cause her to act rashly. They needed to learn the whys behind his plan. What was Tezzeret studying and to what end? Still, Tamiyo was uneasy, holding something back. A revelation that would change everything for Kaito and Kamigawa. During the War of the Spark, Tamiyo met with a planeswalker known simply as the Wanderer. They talked, and in that discussion, the Wanderer mentioned Tezzeret and a weapon the planeswalker was prototyping. It was called the Reality Chip. Tamiyo wasn't sure what the tech could do, but the night the Emperor vanished in Kyodai's temple, Tezzeret was using the Reality Chip on the Great Kami, hoping to control Kyodai. However, the device didn't have Tezzeret's intended results. Rather, the effects ignited the Emperor's own latent spark, and she was flung from Kamigawa, taking the moniker the Wanderer. The Wanderer and the Emperor are one and the same. Kaito was shocked by the news. His friend, a planeswalker all this time, out exploring the multiverse much like he had done. But then why hadn't she returned? Tamiyo explained what the Wanderer had told her, that whatever the reality chip was, it altered the Wanderer's planeswalker spark. She was unable to control this gift as they could. She jumped aimlessly from plane to plane, lost in a never-expanding blind eternity. In a way, she was trapped, a prisoner to her own gift. Unable to return at will, chance would have to guide her home. Relieved that his friend was at least still alive, Kaito turned to action. The reality chip, the schematics Tamishi had been working on, Tezzeret needed it for his plans. And now, they needed it as a means to bring the Emperor home. Perhaps if it destabilized the Wanderer's spark, it could be used to give her more control, allowing Kamigawa's Emperor to return. Tamiyo was against rushing headstrong into an unknown Tezzeret plot, urging patience. But Kaito doesn't know the meaning of the word, and runs to confront the man with the metal arm, heading to Tamishi's forgotten lab, where the remains of his friend's research sat. Breaking into the eerily silent lab, Kaito is disgusted by the sight of more emaciated Kami, tubes running from their barely alive bodies to large machines. Wires ran from those machines to a singular point, where a small neon-lit chip with blue tendrils danced in constant motion. The reality chip. He grabs the chip, shoving it into his pocket, feeling vindicated in his decision not to listen to Tamiyo. But as he exits, a looming shadow stops him, and speaks in a grating voice like metal shaving against metal.
Your fleshling eyes suggest familiarity, but knowledge of our meeting evades my memory. The existence of a second Jin-Gitaxias on this plane is highly improbable. Therefore, your recognition must be accepted as genuine. Schematics are unimportant in this instance. Theft is an offense that will require swift retribution.
The monster had a name, Jin-Gitaxias. From the shadows, dozens of ninjas appeared, henchmen to both Jin-Gitaxias and Tezzeret. The first steps forward, blade raised, as their master skulked back into the dark. Kaito used his throwing stars from his blade to strike at enemies near and far. They were paid muscle, but Kaito was fighting with righteous fury. Yet these minions weren't Kaito's target. He had the chip, he needed to escape. Stabbing at strangers and dodging blows, Kaito throws a device from his belt, releasing a black smog. As he tumbles out, he activates its secondary function, as electricity pulsed through the clouds, zapping the henchmen, clearing a path for Kaito's escape. Jin-Gitaxias had to have known that he now possessed the reality chip. Still, the coast seemed to be clear, until a lurching abomination rose above the rooftops. It was a giant mech, shaped like a dragon with teeth and a maw just as deadly. Kaito felt the reality chip whirl in his pocket, thumbing with life. And when he turned to face the mech, its lights were extinguished, and it ceased to move. What stood above it was a warrior of white hair, moving like water. The Wanderer, the Emperor of Kamigawa, had returned. Knowing more henchmen were en route, the planeswalkers quickly escaped Otawara and returned to Iganjo Castle. It had been many years since either Kaito or the Emperor had been here, and it was a reunion strained by a decade of silence. The Emperor went alone into Kyodai's temple to see the great Kami she shared such a strong bond with. The Emperor was the flesh of Kamigawa, while Kyodai was its spirit. Together they brought harmony to the plane, and finally with their reunion, the pain and anguish Kyodai felt was lifted. Still, anxiety permeated the great Kami, and an uneasiness fell over the Emperor as well. It was her spark. It was unstable. Fate brought her back to Kamigawa, but it again pulled on her to planeswalk away. She needed help if she were to stay, and Kaito pulls out the reality chip. Tamiyo places the device onto the Wanderer's hand, as its writhing tentacles leach into her skin and fuse to her body. The process was painful, but this chip was what caused the instability, and it was their only chance to reverse it. After it was done, the Wanderer and Kyodai felt at peace, as if, at least for now, the Wanderer's spark was under control. Now they needed to think of their next step. Kaito was so relieved to see his friend again, but it's not like their friendship could just pick up right where they left off, having casual chit-chats on the roof of Inganjo. He was here to help her through these trying times, fulfilling the role of a samurai that he so railed against, and now he was happy to do so. The reality chip stabilized her planeswalker spark, but it also linked the Wanderer to the monitoring machines back at Tamishi's compound. It gave her visions. It saw recordings of the beast, Jin-Gitaxias, and his next moves. He's informed the leader of the Uprisers, Rizona, of the Emperor's return. The Uprisers are mustering their forces to attack Inganjo before word of her return gets out to Kamigawa. They plan to end the throne tonight. Tamiyo fetches Eiko and Lightpaws, who are both stunned at the Emperor's return, but a heartfelt reunion isn't possible right now. Now they needed to strategize. Two things needed to be done. First, Inganjo, the Emperor, and Kyodai needed to be protected. They didn't know why Jin-Gitaxias has ordered the Uprisers to attack. The monster itself doesn't want the throne. He wants something else, maybe even Kyodai. Regardless if it's a direct challenge or a distraction, they cannot let the castle fall. The second is that they need to destroy Tamishi's workshop. All his research on the reality chip was crucial to this monster and Tezzeret. In destroying it, they would delay their plans significantly and perhaps render Kamigawa useless to them. It was agreed that Tamiyo and Kaito would go to destroy Tamishi's research, while Eiko, Lightpaws, and the Emperor would stay behind and rally the Imperial forces and samurai to defend the castle. With Kaito and Tamiyo again risking their lives walking into Tamishi's workshop, they find it quite open and quiet. Too quiet. Still, they had a mission to destroy everything. Those same kami barely clinging to life before now laid there lifeless. In shock, the pair are confronted by the man with the metal arm, Tezzeret. Tezzeret barely remembers Kaito from all those years ago, that boy who flung a roof tile at him. Since then, he had heard of a planeswalker trailing him, but now in facing his unknown adversary, Tezzeret was disappointed. He thanked the two for coming, for helping continue their research, for it wasn't the kami they were truly after, it was planeswalkers. Jin-Gitaxias slowly reveals himself from the shadows, confirming that Tezzeret and this monster had indeed been working together this entire time, and Tamishi's lab was simply a ploy, bait to trap them in. Their ultimate plan is revealed. Their research wasn't just on the kami, it was on the basis of the physical and spiritual. Kami are beings of physical matter comprised totally of spiritual energy, a makeup very similar to planeswalkers. The kami didn't share their sparks, but they contain the essence of the multiverse itself, housed in a physical vessel, much like a planeswalker. And kami are far easier to come by than what Phyrexia really needs, the very thing they brought to them, planeswalkers. They are trying to make Phyrexian planeswalkers. Kaito wants revenge. He's as rash as ever, throwing bladed stars towards his decade-long target, but he underestimates his opponent. Tezzeret can control tech, bend metal with his mind. This was child's play to him. Stopping them mid-air, he commands pipes to wrap around Kaito and Tamiyo's bodies, covering the moonfolk's eyes to ensure she cannot read any of her pesky scrolls. Tezzeret kept the pair just inches away from death, blades and stars dangling near their necks. If one would try to be heroic, the other would die. They only needed a single planeswalker for their experiments. Helplessly bound and forced to choose submission or a foolhardy death, Kaito pulls the explosives he planned to use on the lab from his pocket. The Emperor was willing to sacrifice everything for Kamigawa. He was now willing to do the same. To sacrifice everything for the people he cared about. To finally ensure the Emperor was safe. He threw the bomb, knowing he would die alongside Tezzeret in this monster, bracing for an impact that never came. It hovered for a moment before jolting to Tezzeret's hand. where it fell apart piece by piece. Tech, the planeswalker, had mastered in his sleep. They were captured utterly as they're knocked unconscious. Back at Kyodai's temple, the Wanderer is again having visions still linked to the monitoring machines at Tamishi's compound. She sees Tamiyo and Kaito in trouble. They don't have much time. If they were to live, she needed to planeswalk to them now. But how? Her spark was unstable already. She lets her mind meld with the great Kami she was bound to. The Wanderer believed it was Kyodai that managed to bring her home after so many years. Now she again turned to the spirit to grant her strength to control her spark and the reality chip. With their bond, the Wanderer felt like a compass whose needle finally pointed home. Not just to Kamigawa, but her friends who made it home. Kaito never gave up on her, and she wouldn't give up on him now, as the Wanderer planeswalks from the castle to her friends in need. In a flash of light, the Wanderer did not hesitate. She did not announce herself, quickly pulling out her blade and, like wind, soundlessly striking at her foe, Jin-Gitaxias. Taken off guard, the Phyrexian was surprised by the cut of a blade trailing from his neck to his chest, letting out a blood-chilling metallic cry. The Wanderer then turns to the surgical tables holding down Kaito and Tamiyo, breaking them free. The fight wasn't over yet, but finally, all three would be fighting side by side. Tamiyo, the Wanderer, and Kaito took to the field, clashing with Tezzeret and his forces of minions. The Wanderer was fighting like it was a well-practiced dance, as the hulking body of Jin-Gitaxias laid there motionless. With the three planeswalkers working in tandem, and only Tezzeret posing as a true threat, the group quickly got the upper hand. Tezzeret finally being subdued by a paralysis scroll read by Tamiyo. Tezzeret was key to unlocking whatever he and this monster had planned. He also had crimes that needed to be paid for, with that judgment coming from those he hurt most, the Kami. Kyodai would be the arbiter of justice, but there was still another concern. Rizona and her uprisers were laying siege to Nganjo. The Wanderer was needed back at the castle to rally her people and stand for its defense. While Tezzeret couldn't move his body, his mind and powers were still rather potent. He willed the reality chip, made of metal and still implanted into the Wanderer's hand, to dance to his will. Its tendrils dug deeper and with new purpose. Whatever he had done to it further destabilized the Wanderer's planeswalker spark. She couldn't simply planeswalk back to the castle or risk being lost to the blind eternities. Worse still, she could feel that same uncertain pull from her spark beckoning her to leave Kamigawa. Her only hope was to get to Kyodai. Kaito knocked Tezzeret out with a well-placed crate to the back of the head to prevent any further interference, while Tamiyo removed the chip and placed it into herself. It no longer provided its purpose to the Wanderer, but it still was useful in augmenting the powers of whatever it was placed in. With it on Tamiyo, she was able to cast a spell and gain control of one of the many surveillance mechs circling Otawara. With this boarded tech, they could quickly return to Nganjo, their captured foe safely secured. Though the mech brought them to the castle quickly, with the planeswalkers surveying the battle taking place below, it wasn't without its issues. Though the chip concentrated Tamiyo's power, it took her mind away from her spell over Tezzeret, and he could feel his magical restraints weakening. Below, Kaito and the Wanderer were astonished at how quickly the uprisers had breached the main gates of the castle. They fought at Rizona's command, and she fought with a burning rage. That would have to wait, however. Tezzeret had gained enough autonomy back to wrench smoke bombs from Kaito's belt, smashing them upon the mech's back and clouding them all in a coughing smog. Tezzeret fell as the mech itself crashed into Nganjo. Kaito worried for the Wanderer's life after the crash, but that worry faded as he saw her racing towards Kyodai's temple to again bond with the Kami and protect her throne. But he too spied Tezzeret chasing after her, still believing she had the reality chip. Kaito again climbed the roofs of Nganjo, trying to protect his friend. This time, Kaito was quicker, more accurate, tossing debris at his target, smashing Tezzeret in the side of the head and knocking him from the roof. Kaito knew of his opponent's tricks, that bringing tech or metal to this fight would be a hindrance. He discarded his weapons, knives, katana, even his drone with the Kami Himoto, sending it out to find help. He would face Tezzeret unarmed, but he didn't need throwing stars for this fight. He fought for the people he cared about, with a purpose Tezzeret could never hope to match. The two clashed, metal straining against muscle. Kaito managed to round a kick square to Tezzeret's temple, though his enemy was still too strong for him, at least alone. Himoto had returned with Kaito's sister, Eiko, who drove a golden dagger deep into Tezzeret's thigh before bouncing away from his retaliation. Tamiyo too appeared in the sky above them, paralysis scroll in hand. Tezzeret tried to distract the moonfolk, blinding her with sand, but his fate would match that of their last encounter. Tezzeret frozen in place. But this time, he noticed the reality chip was on Tamiyo's hand, not the Wanderer's. Tezzeret grimaced as he commanded the chip and in turn commanded Tamiyo. The Moonfolk Planeswalker released the spell as Tezzeret quickly opened a portal from his chest. It wasn't like planeswalking, but something else Kaito couldn't place. When the portal closed, Tezzeret and Tamiyo were gone. Kaito had no time to process the loss. The Wanderer was still out there, fighting, and a war was waging on Nganjo's steppes. The Wanderer had leapt from the confines of Kyodai's temple and joined the fray, besting every upriser who dared challenge her, until she met their leader, Rizona, in one-on-one combat. The Wanderer had been trained not only by the best fighters of Kamigawa, but in martial forces throughout the entire multiverse. Rizona posed no real threat. Still, she didn't want to execute the radical. She gave Rizona chance after chance to surrender, but her fury wouldn't be abated. Though misguided, the Uprisers' words rang true even to the Wanderer. The people of Kamigawa could no longer trust an emperor who abandoned them for a decade, and had no clear way to prevent it from happening in the future. Before Rizona got herself killed, she fell unconscious, knocked out by a rock thrown from across the courtyard by Kaito, who had returned to help his friend. Together victorious, they returned to Kyodai's temple, but rather than reveling in glory, the Wanderer was buckled over in pain. Without the reality chip, her spark continued to destabilize. Her time on Kamigawa, or any plane for that matter, was finite. It was ripping her apart from the inside, forcing her to leave her home, her friends. Though Kaito mourned the thought, it was the Kami Kyodai who wailed the loudest. Their bond was what kept Kamigawa safe, and this plane would always need a strong and present leader. After exchanging a few words only heard by Emperor and Kami, Kaito was told to fetch Lightpaws, his old teacher, quickly. The Wanderer had made a decision. Kamigawa needed an emperor. She would serve that role so long as she was able, but when her spark made that impossible, someone strong and true must lead in her stead. Lightpaws would be the new Emperor of Kamigawa, blessed by Kyodai herself. With no way to know where Tamiyo, Tezzeret, and the reality chip had gone, Kaito could only sit by and watch as he again lost his friend to fate. As her power ushered her away from Kamigawa, her home, light radiated from Lightpaws, the new Emperor of Kamigawa, as Eiko and Kaito bowed. In the aftermath, Rizona and the Uprisers were captured, and Lightpaws was welcomed as a new, blessed emperor. Kaito and his sister went back to Tamishi's compound to look for the body of Jin-Gitaxias, but it was gone, likely whisked away by Tezzeret after he kidnapped Tamiyo. Though it pained him, Kaito, along with the Kami of the Spark, Himoto, had a mission to accomplish. Again, they would go out in search of a friend, this time Tamiyo, who risked everything to help them. In finding her and the reality chip, maybe he could use it in tracking down the Emperor and bring her home for good. With tears in his eyes, he bids his sister and Kamigawa farewell, promising to return and never again leave without saying goodbye. While Kaito's mission was clear, the fate of Tamiyo was not. Stolen by Tezzeret, who had repaired the broken body of Jin-Gitaxias, the Moonfolk Planeswalker awoke on a strange plane, rising from a cold metal table that felt all too familiar. She looked around, weird shapes appearing before her, reading her scrolls in a language she didn't recognize, but could still read all the same. She felt wrong, but natural, as if changed, but also corrected.
Arise, first of the Phyrexian Planeswalkers! You will not be the last!
Jin-Gitaxias had ushered in a new age for the Phyrexians, successfully completing the first Planeswalker. Tamiyo knew what it meant to defend her home and her family, and now her family was undoubtedly the Phyrexians, whom she would defend with her dying breath. She looked over to the 3 iron-bound scrolls she possessed, spells of such power that she swore to never unleash them. But now, with Phyrexia swimming in her very being, she would use them for her new family at a moment's notice. Tezzeret appears, verbalizing his distrust for their new creation. After all, she had just fought against their plans just days ago. However, Jin-Gitaxias is confident in his experiment. Tamiyo had been completed totally. She was now just as much an ally as he was. Word would be sent to Elish Norn about this momentous achievement, but still more information was needed. Other plans needed to come to fruition, as Tamiyo stands with Phyrexia, her new home, and her new family. And that, you guys, is the complete story of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. The plot of the Phyrexians thickens as we get our first ever Phyrexian planeswalker, R.I.P. Tamiyo. I loved her character as she was involved in so many amazing stories, especially on Innistrad. Now her moonlit beauty will forever bless new Phyrexia. How do you feel about this new development in MTG? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share it on social media, as that's the best way that you can support our channel. As always, guys, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!